Good evening, America. Tonight, our nation finds itself in a state of shock, disbelief, and bitter division. The brutal murder of conservative activist Charlie Kirk has not only shaken the political establishment, but also set off a cultural earthquake. For millions of Americans, this killing was not just the death of a public figure, it was a sign that the political conflict that has raged online and on cable news for years is now bleeding into the streets. In Utah, where the incident occurred, witnesses described a chaotic scene. A young man, Tyler Robinson, 22 years old, allegedly motivated by his disdain for the right-wing movement, opened fire during a conservative community event. Police reports confirm that Robinson's social media footprint was littered with anti-fascist memes and incendiary posts. What for him might have been a reckless act of political rage has now become a national tragedy, one that could reshape the very foundation of America's free speech debate. For conservatives, Charlie Kirk was more than just a controversial speaker. He was a symbol of unapologetic resistance to what they call woke culture. His fiery speeches, his college tours, his unapologetic support of Trumpism, all of these made him both a hero and a villain. To his followers, Kirk embodied courage. To his detractors, he represented everything toxic in modern politics. And now, his death has turned into a rallying cry. But here's the paradox. The same political movement that has long claimed free speech as its sacred principle is now openly demanding restrictions. Conservative lawmakers and right-wing commentators, in the wake of Kirk's death, argue that words have consequences. They insist that criticism of figures like Kirk, even jokes or memes, should no longer be tolerated if those words could be linked to violence. This is a stunning reversal. For decades, the American right framed itself as the defender of the First Amendment. They attacked universities for silencing speakers, they mocked cancel culture, they defended even the most offensive rhetoric as a test of liberty. Yet today, in their grief and fury, they are pushing for what looks dangerously close to censorship. Critics, Democrats, civil libertarians, and some independent voices warn that this is a slippery slope. If every word, every post, every joke can be reinterpreted as incitement, then freedom of expression itself is under siege. Do we punish speech because a criminal acted on his own hatred, asked one ACLU lawyer, or do we hold individuals accountable without silencing society? The murder of Charlie Kirk is therefore not just a tragedy, it is a political turning point. Across the media landscape, the arguments rage. Fox News hosts call for accountability from the left, while MSNBC anchors accuse Trump's allies of weaponizing grief. On social media, hashtags trend in opposite directions, some demanding justice for Charlie, others warning hands-off free speech. This clash is raw, emotional, and unresolved. The United States is being forced to ask itself a dangerous question. When does speech cross the line into violence, and who decides where that line is drawn? If stage one was about the shock of Charlie Kirk's murder and the sudden firestorm over free speech, stage two is about what happens when grief collides with raw political power. And at the center of this storm is Donald J. Trump. The former president, who remains the most polarizing figure in American politics, wasted no time turning Kirk's death into a weapon. In fiery speeches and social media posts, Trump declared that this was not just an isolated act of violence, it was proof that America's enemies are not abroad but within. The radical left is waging war on our patriots, Trump shouted at a rally. They kill our heroes, they mock our values, and they will pay the price. These words electrified his base. Supporters cheered, waving flags and chanting Kirk's name as if he were a martyr. But to his opponents, the rhetoric was chilling. Civil rights leaders, Democrats in Congress, and even some moderate conservatives accused Trump of using a tragedy to justify authoritarian measures. This isn't about justice, said one Democratic lawmaker. This is about revenge politics, pure and simple. Indeed, Trump's allies have floated proposals that go far beyond grief-driven mourning. Some Republican governors suggested enhanced surveillance of activist groups labeled as left-wing extremists. Conservative members of Congress hinted at new laws targeting online communities accused of spreading anti-patriotic sentiment. There are even whispers in Trump's inner circle about introducing federal penalties for defamatory speech against political leaders, an idea that runs directly against the First Amendment. The logic is dangerous but effective. Take a single tragedy, magnify its symbolism, and use it to justify extraordinary powers. History books are filled with similar moments, when governments exploited violence to clamp down on dissent. Critics warn that America may now be walking that very path, and yet the emotional appeal is undeniable. At Kirk's funeral, surrounded by cameras and sobbing supporters, Trump framed the moment as a test of loyalty to the nation itself. "You are either with us or against us," he declared, pointing his finger at the crowd like a general rallying troops. The line drew thunderous applause and deep unease among those who fear that Trump's America is collapsing into a culture of enemies lists and political purges. Even international voices have noticed the shift. European leaders express concern that the United States, once the global champion of free expression, now debates criminalizing speech under the banner of security. Human rights groups called it a dangerous precedent that could embolden authoritarian regimes abroad. Meanwhile, Trump's inner circle has leaned into the chaos. Advisors hint that the Kirk doctrine could become a campaign platform, a promise to protect America's patriots by silencing their critics. "We will not let our heroes die in vain," one strategist said. "We will change the law to make sure this never happens again." But here lies the paradox. By attempting to honor Kirk, Trump risks betraying the very freedom that Kirk once championed. The question now is whether America will follow him down this road of vengeance, or whether cooler heads can hold the line. Stage 2 ends with the haunting realization that this tragedy has morphed into something larger than a murder case. It has become the seed of a new political order, one where grief becomes strategy and outrage becomes law. While the nation fixates on the fallout from Charlie Kirk's murder and the escalating war of words between Trump and his critics, another crisis looms quietly but dangerously in the background: a government shutdown. It is the kind of event that might normally dominate headlines, but in the current climate of outrage and political spectacle, it risks being overshadowed until it is too late. At the heart of the crisis lies Congress's failure to pass a budget. With the fiscal year ending on September 30th, the United States faces the very real possibility that the government will run out of money to fund its operations. Social Security payments, federal salaries, veterans' benefits, food assistance, and even the military could be thrown into chaos. Markets are already jittery, and economists warn that even a short shutdown could ripple through the global economy. Democratic leaders are sounding the alarm. They have demanded an urgent meeting with President Trump, urging him to step into the negotiations and prevent disaster. The clock is ticking, and the American people cannot afford political games, one senator declared on the floor of Congress. But Trump, ever the tactician, seems to see the standoff as another opportunity. His team has hinted that he might allow the shutdown to happen, using it as leverage to force Democrats into concessions on issues ranging from immigration policy to healthcare funding. This brinkmanship is nothing new in American politics, but the timing is especially dangerous. With the country already shaken by political violence and free speech debates, a shutdown could deepen the sense of instability. Imagine a nation grieving one of its most polarizing figures, debating the future of democracy, and simultaneously watching federal services grind to a halt. It is a recipe for disillusionment, and perhaps even unrest. For many Americans, the shutdown threat feels distant, almost abstract. But for federal workers, the TSA officer at the airport, the park ranger, the single mother in a government office, it is terrifyingly real. They know what it means to work without paychecks, to rely on savings that quickly evaporate, to be told that politics matters more than their livelihoods. For millions who depend on programs like food stamps and Medicare subsidies, the shutdown could mean immediate hardship. Republicans argue that Democrats are exaggerating, insisting that the budget fight is about fiscal discipline and reining in wasteful spending. Yet critics say this is less about fiscal responsibility and more about political theater, a high-stakes gamble where ordinary Americans are the pawns. The contrast is striking. Trump's rallies roar with chants about punishing the left, while in Washington hallways, staffers quietly calculate how many days remain before federal checks stop clearing. It is as if two different Americas are unfolding in parallel, one consumed by rage, the other paralyzed by bureaucracy. What makes this moment truly provocative is the way the crises overlap. Trump's critics fear that he could use the shutdown as further justification for his narrative of a broken system. In campaign speeches, he already paints Washington as incompetent and corrupt. A shutdown, whether engineered or simply tolerated, would serve as Exhibit A in his case against the establishment. And with Charlie Kirk's death already weaponized as proof of a nation under siege, the shutdown could become another rallying cry. Stage 3 leaves us with a stark image: America walking toward the edge of a cliff, distracted by fiery rhetoric, while the ground beneath its government begins to crumble. The question is no longer just about free speech or vengeance. It is also about survival, whether the machinery of government will keep running in a country tearing itself apart. As if America's political drama wasn't volatile enough, a cultural bombshell has now detonated: the suspension of Jimmy Kimmel Live, one of the most recognizable late-night shows on American television. What was the crime? A monologue. A few biting jokes. Words spoken with sharp wit, mocking the MAGA movement's response to Charlie Kirk's death. And for that, the show has been pulled off the air. The decision sparked outrage across the political spectrum, but for very different reasons. Conservatives applauded it as long overdue accountability, proof that even celebrities should face consequences for words that endanger patriots. They argued that in an era of deadly polarization, jokes are no longer harmless, they are weapons. But liberals and civil libertarians saw something far darker: a precedent where government pressure, corporate fear, or both can silence one of the most influential platforms for political satire in the country. In response, Democrats in Congress moved quickly. Within hours, they introduced a bill explicitly designed to protect free speech in media and entertainment, a symbolic but powerful gesture. Lawmakers framed it as a defense of democracy itself. If comedians can't criticize leaders, if artists can't question power, then America has lost its soul, one representative declared. The bill has little chance of passing in a Republican-controlled House, but the message was clear. The fight over the First Amendment is now front and center. The cultural clash has only deepened the national divide. On social media, supporters of Kimmel flooded feeds with hashtags like #FreeSpeechNow and #StandWithKimmel, while right-wing activists countered with #Protect Charlie and #StopTheHate. The digital war mirrors the chaos in Congress. Two sides locked in mutual hostility, convinced that the other represents an existential threat. Meanwhile, Trump himself capitalized on the controversy, condemning Kimmel as a disgrace and suggesting that comedians who spread lies should face serious consequences. To his supporters, this was strength, a leader standing up against what they perceive as a liberal cultural elite. To his critics, it was authoritarianism with a smile. The image of a president threatening entertainers over their jokes is not just un-American, they argue. It is terrifying. So where does this leave America? Let's take stock. A conservative activist murdered, his death turned into a political weapon. A president using tragedy to stoke vengeance and expand his power. A government teetering on the edge of shutdown, threatening the livelihoods of millions. A beloved comedian's silence, sparking a new war over free expression. Each of these crises could stand alone as a major national controversy, but together they create a perfect storm. A portrait of a democracy under siege from within. Freedom, justice, stability, culture, all are being tested at once. And here is the haunting truth. These battles are not just about policy or partisanship. They are about the very identity of the United States. Are we still the land of the free when grief becomes censorship, when tragedy becomes revenge, when government itself stalls under the weight of political theater? As this report ends, the question remains unresolved. America is at a crossroads, pulled between liberty and control, compassion and vengeance, democracy and authoritarian drift. And for every Charlie Kirk, every Jimmy Kimmel, every politician making speeches in marble halls, the real price will be paid by ordinary citizens. They are the ones who will live with the consequences of decisions made in anger and fear. Tonight, the headlines scream of free speech, shutdown, censorship, and revenge. Tomorrow, the story continues. The only certainty is this: the struggle for America's soul has never been more fierce, more personal, or more dangerous.